Okay, so we've managed to catch up with Edward Pentin. Edward, welcome. How are you?
Thanks. Good to be here.
I think most of our readership and the viewers at Remnant Forum and Remnant TV, I should say, are going to be familiar with your work. But if you wouldn't mind, just tell me what exactly are you doing at the moment in Rome?
Well, at the moment, I'm continuing to report for the National Catholic Register, just reporting on the Holy Father and the Vatican, and just continuing to cover quite a challenge, but we're keeping on to reporting.
Right. I think it's everyone. I think here agrees that it's great that you're here because the idea with this conference is to try to sort of raise awareness in a dignified and respectful way that there are issues that really desperately need to be discussed. And there are priests here. There's been a bishop here, so there's a sense that throughout the entire church. There's a need for a conversation to happen. You've come all the way from Rome to be here, and I'm curious what exactly about this event attracted you?
Well, one often hears in Rome people saying there's not enough education, there's not enough catechesis. People don't really know enough about the tradition of the church, the teachings of the church. And this sort of conference, I think at least, helps bridge that gap. So I think this sort of educates the faithful in a way which teaches them about the tradition. The church didn't just start after Vatican II, it goes back obviously 2,000 years. And I think this sort of conference would be of interest to readers because I think a lot of readers want that sort of gap filled. And this conference, I think, goes a long way to doing that. And I've heard a lot about it over the years, and I think it's just interesting to find out what it is and how it's run and how it and the contribution it gives to the church.
I don't know if you identify quote unquote as a traditionalist or not. But what do you think are the chances, given the situation now where things are really going from bad to worse, that some of the partisan politics and the internecine squabbling could be set aside, and those who believe in the church and want to defend the church and want to do the right thing by the church and serve Christ and everything could come together in a way moving forward? Maybe obviously maintaining their autonomy, but able to see the bigger picture. Do you think there's any hope for that in the future?
Well, I'd like to think these kind of conferences or these kind of events do that, because there is a lot of ignorance around. A lot of the ignorance, I think, causes this friction and this tension. The ignorance about the crisis, and it is a crisis that we're facing. And unless that's kind of analysed and people are properly educated about its causes and how it could be caused, even if they don't agree with that, then I think that goes a long way to unifying the church and bringing it together. So I just see it as my job as a journalist to help report that, and so help people to realise that these kind of events exist and that there is that means to bring us together through being better informed, better educated, better catechized.
Now, what about, say something if you would about the question of the Mass, because I think sometimes people think, well, if it's a quote-unquote, again, traditionalist conference, it must be all about the dispute over the Mass, extraordinary form, the new Mass and so forth. But that doesn't come up so much at this conference, as it's just a centerpiece. Spiritually, everyone goes to the traditional Latin Mass every day, but there's so much more involved in this Reformation, Catholic or counter-revolution, if you want to use that word, than the liturgy. As important as the liturgy is, there's so many other ways that's the issues that need to be addressed, philosophy, theology, and so forth. What do you think about that idea that there's such an emphasis on the Mass to the point where it becomes a little divisive sometimes between faithful Catholics who are trying to do their best?
Well, again, I think it's perhaps a sort of narrow focus, the liturgy wars, they call them. I think that's perhaps a narrow focus which can be overcome by broadening the subject matter like it's done here, so that you do deal with the issues, not just one of them. Although I do agree that liturgy is very important personally, but I think just as an observer, I think bringing in all of those different aspects of the faith goes a long way to helping overcome those tensions and battles.
I know you probably can't say a whole lot about this, but I'm just curious, the situation in the Vatican. I mean, you're living in Rome. Can you give us any kind of a little bone or something for hope? Is there anything happening in the Vatican that would cause our viewers to feel a little hopeful?
It's difficult to say. I mean, there is. I think there's definitely growing concern about the way things are going, and I've heard this from senior curial officials and people saying that there's a lot of concern among the College of Cardinals, which we don't hear about, and they're not willing to say it for various reasons. But I think if things continue, I think you're going to hear more people becoming vocal. So that's probably reasons to hope. And in a way, I think people think that things have got so bad they can only get better. And whether that's true, I don't know. And of course, that's subjective whether it's bad or not. But I mean, this is what I hear from a lot of people I speak to. So I think, and of course, the Lord's in charge. So I think there's always reasons for hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you think that a conference like this, maybe most people here are lay people, but not all, is reflective of the same sort of thing, where they realize things are getting really bad, and that maybe brings them together in a way, not out of sheer desperation, but out of a sense of urgency. We really do need to come together, and I think maybe it's happening at every level, including in Rome.
Yes, definitely. And also the laity, I think, are finding a voice more and more. And some people think in Rome that it's going to be left to the laity to really help bring us out of this crisis, because the hierarchy are constrained in all sorts of ways, as we see, whether it's self-imposed or not. But there is a sense that perhaps the laity are the only ones who can bring us through this, and that's why I think this is very interesting. That it's very much a lay initiative, lay event, which has its roots going back right to the beginning of this crisis.
That's right. Now, final question, or asking you for your observation. There is a crisis in the church. There's a crisis in the state. We all know this. This event, however, I mean, it's your first time. Does it strike you as a dour and depressing sort of thing, or have you seen some optimism here in this symposium?
Well, there's been some great jazz playing by Chris Ferrara and drums, which I wasn't expecting. But no, it's a lovely spirit on the whole. Certainly, there's some passions as well, ideas and things that people believe. So that's interesting as well. No, but I found it very, very good. It's a very good Catholic sense of fellowship and getting along, and a good sense of just a unity, I'd say, among people here.
Think you might come back next year?
I'd like to, yeah. How could I not? It's also a beautiful place.
Right.
But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
But,
well, thank you so much for your time tonight to share with our viewers a few of your thoughts. Appreciate it very much. Keep up the great work. We're all reading your stuff and very excited by, even though it's bad, oftentimes what you're reporting on, your reporting is very fair, and we're really grateful to you for that.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. Good to meet you at last.
Yeah, you too. All right, thanks. Okay, so we are now with Dr. Thomas Pink, who is the professor of philosophy at King's College. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, so you've come all the way from London.
Yes, not a long journey compared to some here, so I'm afraid. Some people have come from Australia, so it's far longer.
I'm curious, that still is it long enough trip to, it took some commitment on your part as a sacrifice to make the trip. What is it about this place or this event that attracted you?
Well, I came because I knew John Rao, and I also knew you and Chris Ferrara. I knew that it was an important venue for discussing issues within the life of the modern church that are not given adequate coverage in areas of the official church at the moment, but which need intellectual discussion. And it's events like these that allow people to develop a better understanding of what's going on in the church, and what's problematic, and what might better be done to enable the church to fulfill her mission.
Now, there are people, there are professors like yourself, doctors, priests, there was a bishop here this time, that are coming from all around the world. And it seems to me maybe the crisis in the church is what's making an event like this more attractive, that we need to come together and discuss what's happening, discuss the history of the church and so forth, but also moving forward to strategize a little bit, because things aren't great right now in the church or in the state, but especially for our purposes in the church.
Yes, I mean, I think that one of the fundamental problems is an inadequate theological understanding of our situation. I think what goes on in the church at any time in her history is that besides her magisterial teaching, which obviously can't change and which we are obliged to believe, there's going to be a lot of other theological material that's not actually itself church teaching, but which is the way in which the church or officials of the church understand what they're doing in relation to applying and church teaching and pursuing the mission of the church. I call this official theology. It's always existed. It's perfectly proper for it to exist. It can come in official statements that say this isn't magisterial teaching, but this is what the mind of the church at the moment is. It will come in the policies for running seminaries. It will come in what the church says about herself to non-Catholics as well as to Catholics. We're not necessarily teaching. And sometimes this material can get very problematic. And it needs people to understand where it's coming from, why it works the way it is, and why sometimes it might be problematic. And it's perfectly proper to criticise it, because it's not itself magisterial teaching. It's just theological claims that are often quite speculative. Like, for example, claims about what happens to unbaptised babies if they die before the age of reason. Are they going to enjoy natural happiness, or might they enjoy the beatific vision? That's going to affect whether you have special ceremonies to bury them, what you'll say in pastoral comfort to the grieving parents. And in such a case, there might not be very clear magisterial teaching in any particular direction, but at any given time in the Church's history, there will be a prevailing official theory that will determine liturgical procedures, determine how the parents are comforted, and sometimes it might be better based than at other times. That's just one example. Again, how are we going to comport ourselves to non-Catholics? Is our main job to convert and evangelise them, even if they're already baptised Protestants, or should we be dialoguing and working together with them in a way that brackets conversion and evangelisation? It's a really important question. And again, the Church has, in her official theology, very often taken a different view at different times in history.
So would this be, are you referring perhaps now in the present time to all of this church about the church of accompaniment, or we hear a lot out of the Vatican now about the new orientation of the church, which seems to some extent to depart from the traditional understanding, even if it wasn't binding magisterial teachings, they do seem to be taking it in a different direction that we haven't seen before.
Yes, I think that part of what is going on is that the Church has developed a modern official theology that sees herself as possibly living in harmony with an unconverted world, a world that is not yet Catholic, possibly not even Christian. And it sees peaceful coexistence with such a world as not only possible but actually required. That was not historically the way the Church saw her relationship to the unconverted world, which saw in the past she saw the unconverted world as much more ambiguously a world of error and darkness, where people's salvation was genuinely endangered. Now, obviously you can't see the world in those terms if you want to live in harmony with it, so you're going to have a new conception of the unconverted world as not outside the influence of Christ, but in a sense even before its actual conversion, as somehow already been removed from the sphere of evil and Satan by the influence of the gospel. Well, is that right? Is that true? That's a very important question. If the unconverted world is actually a much darker place, as the Church used to think of it, than the Church now thinks, then harmony as a way of living with it may not be possible. Yeah. And of course one of the problems about the Church's present state is she's not getting a lot of harmony from the unconverted world. Indeed, you get constant conflict, which the Church tries to sort of pay off and assuage, rather than treat as something entirely to be expected, given that the world is unconverted.
You mentioned something in your talk just a few moments ago that I found very interesting. I don't know, we don't have time to go into it in any depth, but this idea of removing the exorcisms from baptism, for example, does that suggest that even the Church is becoming a little bit embarrassed, or in some way trying to step away from the idea of evil and the existence of the devil?
I don't think it's as strong as that. I think, obviously there are going to be some, I think it's a well-known Jesuit who recently doubted the existence of the devil, but I don't think actually that's a terribly widespread view. I think it's a view it's a little more like this, that Christ came, as the New Rite exorcism says, to remove the power of the devil. But there's a sense in which he's kind of already done it now. So that when you baptize someone and remove original sin from them, you are no longer removing removing them from the dominion of the devil, because in a sense that's already happened. It's a sort of eschatological thing that happened with almost sort of out of the dimension of time. So, of course, people are orthodox about original sin. I think that mostly they're orthodox about the devil, but the devil is not seen as having a continuing power over the world until the point of baptism. But that's not the historical teaching of the Church. If you look at the Council of Florence, as well as the historical liturgy, it talks of baptism as the only way of removing a child from the dominion of the devil. So that's magisterial. And I think it's something we need to take very seriously. Of course, if the unconverted, unbaptized world is under the dominion of the devil on a continuing basis, you aren't going to get harmony with it. It's not possible.
And it seems like the entire narrative is changing when more and more we hear about Genesis basically being a myth, and Adam and Eve may or may not even have existed. You can understand why people would begin to think of baptism as sort of a ceremonial thing. It's nice, but it's not that important anymore.
Well, it's certainly going to be true that there will be everyday belief that goes way beyond any sort of accommodation by modern official theology, whereby they'll actually cease to understand baptism as having anything to do with the removal of original sin. And at the everyday level, there may be lots of Catholics that don't believe in the devil. As I say, I think that's going beyond the existing official theology, so it may be where that official theology might move to in years to come, who knows, unless we do something about it. But I think that that's a further move at the level of popular piety. One, of course, problem is that the existing official theology may be too weakly presented, even as it stands, and the liturgy may, even as it stands, too weakly present that official theology as well, so that it's not heard. And the exorcism is quite weak, and sometimes it's treated as voluntary, and then, of course, you just turn baptism into a welcoming ceremony, and that can easily happen.
Now, I know you have to catch a taxi in a few moments, but I'm just dying of curiosity. I know your philosophy and your theology. Of course, you're a traditional Catholic, but do you identify as a traditional Catholic liturgically? I mean, you attend the traditional Latin Mass?
Yes, I generally go to the Old Rite at 9 o'clock at the London Oratory, but there are lots of other places, happily, where we can attend the Old Rite, as here. But in most large cities, it's generally possible to find the traditional liturgy. I very much don't like to see myself as in any serious sense, well, in any sense, out of communion with people who attend the New Rite. And for example, my wife has lots of friends in our local parish, and she drives a number of them to the New Rite Mass the night before. And we regard that it's very important for people who value the traditional liturgy of the Church to live in communion with other Catholics, because that, in the end, is the way we will draw more people to appreciate the proper form, I think, of the liturgy of the Church, as opposed to the very, very defective form it's now been allowed to take, thanks to Bernini's reforms.
So this event, that John Rao's symposium, the traditional Mass is at the center of it, but it's done in such a wonderful way that I think, as opposed to alienating those in the town here who are unfamiliar with it or who have been, I think the way he organizes this thing brings people to that at least to the point of being curious about the Mass, and maybe that's something that, as traditional Catholics, we can work on to try to lead people lovingly towards the light and not try to bang everyone over the head with that sort
Well,
of.
I think that's right, and I mean this is just one example of an increasing number of events involving traditional Catholics that involve increasingly other Catholics as well. I mean, in a sense, I don't normally speak of myself as a traditional Catholic. I normally speak of myself as a Catholic who happens to attend the traditional rite and who has an affinity to, shall we say, not just magisterial teaching that something that all Catholics are obligated to believe, but a more traditional official theology than we have than is current now, that provides a better explanation of what that magisterial teaching means. And I think that that's the way to put it.
I think so, yeah, that's wonderful. I would love to speak with you some more, but I realize you have to go catch an airplane and get back home to London. But I wanted to thank you so much for taking a few moments of your time to talk with us, and also for being here. This has been a real treat for all of us to have you, and I hope maybe you'll come back next year.
I certainly will, because it's been a treat for my wife Judy and me. We've had a lovely time.
Good, very
Thanks
good.
so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pink. Okay.